So today I've been asked to talk about CAN, but before I really get into that, I'd like to know how many of you have experience with CAN? Raise a hand. Okay, about half or more. Okay, more. Okay, and then how about CAN FD? Less. Okay, so it may actually be better to talk more about CAN FD than to talk about CAN, but I'm still going to try to hit both of them at a breakneck speed. So basically, a quick history about CAN, and then I'll talk a little bit about what CAN is, what and how it works. So yes, in the beginning, there was controlled area network. So this actually started way back in 1985. There was a press announcement back in 1985. We had this thing called CAN, and it's all about really being able to eliminate all the individual layers between components and switches, etc. So being able to work with sensors and actuators. That's really the whole idea behind it. But it was also developed to be very robust for automotive. Okay. The idea was we're going to save weight, we're going to save copper, we're going to save money. Okay. But also increase reliability. Okay, anybody that's worked on an old school pinball machine knows all those, Don raises up his hand, like all of those relays and all of those actuators and like every single one of those failure points. So it's kind of a labor of love to work on something like that, kind of like it is a labor of love to work on the electronics of like a 1960s era vehicle. So more connections mean more failure points. So CAN helped us solve that. As time went on, became a very popular network. It's really ubiquitous within the automotive realm now. Okay, so I'm going to do like a really quick update of what CAN is, and I really want to get to CAN FD because that's what you guys probably would like to know a little bit more about and how this applies to self-driving vehicles a little bit. So basically, technically you can go up to 1 megabit per second with CAN. And CAN is a packet-based type of communication. Okay, serial. So basically, we're sending 1 bit at a time. It does have this concept of arbitration, not destructive message arbitration. It actually arbitrates on the fly versus having one controller that says you can go and you cannot. We have to have some way to control access to the medium, to the bus. Okay, somebody has to decide who goes first. Okay. Unfortunately, because of the way it arbitrates, there's a jitter that's in the bus. Things don't happen every 5 milliseconds. It's not truly deterministic. There's no guaranteed message latency. Okay. The bus itself is really just an unshielded, twisted pair of wires. Okay, I don't show the twisting here, but basically there's 2 terminations of 120 ohms at each end, and we connect all the nodes up to that bus. And so basically all of the ECUs see all of the message all at the same time, essentially. Not exactly, but essentially. So inside of, this is, give me a second here. I want to make sure I can cut some of these things out. But basically the CAN frame is made of, that color looks great on my screen, it looks terrible up there. But over here, this area right here refers to the overhead that we actually have as a header and a footer, if you will, in the data frame itself. And then you have 8 data bytes, up to 8 data bytes. Which nowadays, 8 data bytes at a time is kind of small. We'll talk about how we get around that later. But basically, inside of the frame itself, we have, in this header portion, if you will, at the beginning, we have an arbitration field, or arbitration ID field, and we have a control field. At the end, we have a CRC, or signal redundancy check, and an acknowledgement. And then we'll have a starter frame and end of frame, and either end of those I don't show. Yeah. And one of the cool things about this arbitration and ID field is that we usually get at least 2 different features out of this. But in CAN, at the very basic level, apart from all these higher level protocols that you might have heard of, that ID serves as essentially a way to arbitrate the, to arbitrate, to decide who gets to go first. Okay. Apart from that, it also is an ID. So basically, it allows us to identify what's in the database. Okay. So, essentially, the easy way to describe arbitration is a lower number wins. So if I have, and there's really two different methods we can use, an 11-bit identifier, and there's a way to indicate a 29-bit identifier. Between those two, by the way, Arpin, how late, when would the next, when would I have begun if it were 5%?
I'm talking to Jay right now.
Yeah.
Got into an emergency, so he may or may not make it. And
So
he tried
that's
calling
code
her,
for not.
basically. Well, it's kind of,
Well-
I'm saying if he can make it in like 30 minutes, but looks like he's like,
Probably not gonna happen.
yeah.
Unless, Robert, you got something cool to talk about besides the distance.
I can add to yours some new research.
Well, that's perfect, actually, because I can run longer. So this way, I guess we're gonna just have to do CAN and CNFD, which is okay. That's not a bad thing.
Anybody else have something they want to talk about?
Yeah, because, yeah, no emergencies happen, but that's okay.
You let me know if you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm just gonna keep going, like, he's not gonna show up, in worst cases, I can drop off. We'll just keep on rolling, all right? So basically, this ID, lowest number wins. So that means I can essentially easily determine for each and every set of information I'm gonna send, I can say this is highest priority, and that's not so high priority. So maybe I do diagnostics, but the diagnostics would have an ID that's a really high number, therefore a really low priority will not affect my network. Okay. So as we go on, we have this control field, which basically allows us to extend that identifier, and then we also have this DLC, or data length code. Essentially allows us to say, how many data bytes are we really going to have here? Okay. So basically that number can be, technically it's 4 bits, so I can have from 0 to 15. So I could have 0 if I really wanted to, but it doesn't seem like it serves much of a purpose. But I could actually have 8 for 8 data bytes. If that number is larger than 8, it just still means 8 data bytes. Okay? And that will become important when we talk about Canopy. So extended, if we do extended, then basically we start out with our 11 bits as normal, but then when we indicate if we do extended, we can have an extra 18 bits. So 29-bit IDs. So why would we do that? Well, it turns out that we'll get even more duty out of this ID to say this is the source or this is the destination in higher level protocols. As we have moved on into different types of diagnostics, we'll use this number, or an extended ID, to be the diagnostics, which is even a higher number. So it's even lower in priority. It makes more room for us to put things on the bus as well. And also encode things like the source of a diagnostic, the destination for that diagnostic, that kind of stuff. And this is just a quick show of Vehicle Spy, which is a product Intrepid makes. Basically, we're just showing each one of the data frames coming out, the latest updates of each one of them. And we're showing the arbitration field, which is one of the main things we want to see every time, and almost every other time we want to see these data bytes. I'm not showing anything decoded with a database that would take these IDs and then allow us to figure out how to determine what these data bytes mean. But normally you're not allowed to see those. Those are usually proprietary files. The control field will actually take that DLC or length and we'll actually show that here in the middle. So you know how many data bytes should be there, and then we show you how many data bytes are actually there too, in case there's an error. So the CRC field, or cyclic redundancy check, is essentially a way to check our work. When we have one ECU that wins arbitration, okay, the lowest one wins, then that means one ECU is talking, but all the other ones are listening. Now, as a side effect, it turns out that really all ECUs, including the talker, also listens. Every time that a talker's, the one that's talking is sending out data byte or data bits, it's actually listening as well as part of that bit. Okay, but let's not worry about that for now. It does come into play in Canopy a little bit. But as we go on, we're sending out all of our bits. Everything is happy. We get to the cyclic redundancy check, and what we're doing is we are actually taking this data, this entire set of data, including our arbitration field, control field, and we're doing a computation, which you can find in the specification. The specification for CAN nowadays is ISO 11898. And there is a newest version, I think it's 2015, that actually has the full specification. It has both what we now call classical CAN, which is what I'm describing to you, or CAN 2.0, or CAN FD, or flexible data, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay. So we basically make this calculation based on what we think we sent. We think we did a good job, so we'll send out that number. Now, all the other ECUs are listening, and as they're listening, that means that they are also calculating the same number. And so they're comparing notes with us, if we were the talker. And once we put that CRC out there, then finally, we have a chance to acknowledge. So at the very end here, there's an acknowledge bit, and at least one ECU has to send a 0 on that bit in order for the talker to believe that it sent out the message properly. If no ECU sends out a 0, then the acknowledgement ends up being a 1. And that means it's not acknowledged, so then the transmitter will believe it's not a good message. And it will try to send it again. But it only takes one ECU, even if all the other ECUs don't believe that that message is good. It just as long as one, it only takes one to believe, and then it is a good message. If you will. I already talked about start bit and end of frame. End of frame space is what just the 3 bits in between each frame. I can send all these slides out. This is something I would give out to all the classes, so that's fine if you'd like to see this in more detail. Sometimes it's kind of nice.
No, I didn't write it down.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah. So, one thing that, let's see, what was I going to say? So, well, I kind of talked about arbitration. Who goes first? And that's, I didn't mention non-destructive, and essentially just said, well, lowest one wins, and I just said that, okay? If everything is done right, because part of this is done by the fact that we're designers of the network, and we decide which ECUs or which modules send which messages or arbitration IDs, then we would make sure that, of course, all the ECUs kind of know their place. They'll kind of know that essentially just intrinsically by the numbers that we place for the IDs. But as long as we design it so that nothing overlaps, if there's no overlaps, because if there's overlaps, that means 2 different ECUs send the same arbitration ID at the same time, and now they both think they have the bus, and they both start to transmit. And then eventually one will say, hey, I sent a 1, there's a 0, and now I have a problem. I'm going to say that's an error, and I'm going to send an error frame. And that just means that, imagine all the molecules in your body exploding at the speed of light. It's bad. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that with a test tool, by the way, if we connect something else in the vehicle. If we are in autonomy and we have some things where we're transmitting things to the vehicle as an add-on to an existing vehicle, this is one of these things we have to watch out for. But one cool thing is that if there's some unused arbitration IDs, which there almost always is, it's easy just to add in, move one up to a higher priority, just move around the IDs to make sure that everything has the right priority, and also that we can add on features to the vehicle. Okay, kind of cool. And that's kind of it's really part of why it's become popular. You don't just see CAN in automotive. You see CAN virtually everywhere you can think of. It's in washers and dryers. I don't know if it's in chainsaws.
It's like a coffee machine?
The coffee machines, oh my gosh. Oh, my espresso is being made with CAN, it's awesome. So the way that it works on the bus is that essentially the wiring, if you will, acts like a wired AND gate. So basically, if I'm sending out, if I have 2 different ECUs and they both send a 0, I'm going to see a 0. If one of them sends a 1, the 0 is lower than the 1. It still ends up as a 0. Only when you have A and B sending out a 1 would the bus show a 1. Okay. So that's where the wired AND comes from. Okay. So 0 overwrites 1, the lowest wins. So it works at right at the bit level. And as we move in to that, we'll say, okay, well, higher priority is going to be the one that wins. It's going to be the lowest one. Okay. One thing I always like to show, and I was going to skip over it, but now I don't have to. Which is, I like to show a little video, because virtually no,
Is it when you do the 1 to 0, is it an open drain? Is that what the bus is or what?
that's a good question, yeah, so,
It is.
That's what it looks like.
yeah, yeah.
So, because you have two opposing wires, they're actually, one goes negative, one goes positive, so they actually collide once they reach the end because of the resistor. So they
That's
drain into each other.
Thanks, Robert, for backing me up, since I haven't done any real hard engineering since, I don't know. Well,
Oh my
not
God. Yes,
not
it
good.
is. Yes, it is.
It's been, 1990,
Yeah.
it's been a while here. Well, the first computer I learned to troubleshoot was the Yuck 20, which is a Navy computer. When I was a data systems technician, you programmed it by using a toggle switch, and you had a push button for every register. So you push a button to make it a 1, or push a button to make it a 0 for each and every bit.
Oh my God.
Yes, that's how I learned. Yes, there was. That's what they gave to us students. Yeah.
The
So,
keyboard came about.
well, yeah. I mean, it's, the reason they did this, the reason they used that Yuck 20, I mean, that was out of service by that point, but the reason they used the Yuck 20 is the fact that I just knocked the projector out somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. But it's because, in order to troubleshoot it, it had all the elements in there as cards. So like each card had like 4 gates on it, if I remember correctly. But you could actually troubleshoot down to the element level, which is what we were forced to do. Because when you're in the middle of the ocean, there's no tech support. So why are you not talking to me? What is going on?
It's difficult to manufacture computers.
There we go. I don't know why. Yeah. There we go. Probably see something now. There we go. So let me just show you an example I'd like to show, because a lot of people kind of have a sense of this, but then when I show it to you, then you can really see how it works, okay? So basically, I've got 3 different nodes here. This first node is going to try to send out a 2A0 for the arbitration IP. And node B is 5A0, okay? So that's a bigger number in hexadecimal. And then node C is 220. Well, that's the lowest one in hexadecimal. Must be that's going to win. So they're all starting out to send out a 0 or a 1 or a 0. This first hash mark is just basically to divide out the 3 digits, if you will. So I've got a 2 and a 5 and a 2. So first digit for 3 bits is going to be a 0. For 5, it's going to be a 1. Okay. Now we can't see that. That's the mind of the ECU. Okay. So if you go into, say, let's take a look at the CAN bus. Well, we haven't seen anything on the CAN bus yet, but all we see is what the bus has. Okay. And as we see that, you'll see that it's a 0, because a 0 overwrites a 1. Now, each of the ECUs will check to see if that 0 is what it sent. And of course, one of them is going to say, wait a minute, I sent a 1, I got a 0 on the bus because it listened. And so now it's going to stop transmitting and listen for the rest of that frame. Okay, so it's out of contention. It's out of the race. You got 2 left. So now, the first digit is still 2 for those remaining that are in. And they both sent a 1, so of course the bus will see a 1 eventually. And then they're going to check and say, hey, I sent a 1. Did I say a 1 on the bus? And of course, this is all we see ourselves if we're the users hooked up to the bus. The next digit is going to be a 0. They both send a 0. The bus will have a 0. They both listen. Everything's still okay. Now the next digit is going to be a little bit different. Okay. Now we get to this, you'll see we've got to A0, that means A is going to be a 10, 1, 0, 1, 0. And then for node C, it's 220, the second digit is a 2, 0, 0, 1, 0. So a day of reckoning is coming, a bit of reckoning is coming for 2A0. So it sends a 1, the other sends a 0, we're going to have a 0 on the bus because it's a lower number. And then they both listen. The second one is also going to lose. So the idea is, as long as you don't have IDs that match at the end of 11 bits or 29 if it's extended, then you are going to have one and only one GCU, the champion. I don't believe that champion at the same time with the distance here. I don't know. Oh,
We're gonna win.
could be. We'll get lines, I'd be like, you're crazy, Leale. Crazy. So that's basically how the arbitration works. And if you want that video, I can send it out to you. So, any questions about that? Because it's like you kind of hear about it, you go, yeah, I kind of know how it works. And then when you see it, it seems to make a little bit more sense. So, after I talk, yes, go ahead.
So let's say you have a 1 megabit bus.
Mhm.
Are each of those bits held for 1 microsecond?
Sorry, what's that again?
For a 1 megabit speed bus,
Yeah.
are each of those bits held for 1 microsecond?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Yeah, so that's yeah, the bits per second, yes.
So it's trying to transmit for 1 second and it's trying to listen for 1 microsecond.
Oh, back up. Good question. So I'm going to jump way ahead to something I skipped over when I did these slides, but I actually have it in the slide I'll send you. And that's the bit timing. We divide each bit into time quanta. So basically, there's technically, for standard CAN, there's really only technically 8 time quanta. You can really think of it as during the 1 bit time, there's 4 different sections. The first bit is this, or the first portion is the sync, where we'll shorten it up or lengthen it so that we can, yes, I'm sorry, I'm messing this up. Is the sync is the first, right? Yes. And then the second is propagation, yes. So basically the first quarter of the bit time is the sync time. We'll shorten it up or lengthen it depending on what we're seeing from other, the existing, or what's on the CAN bus. Because we don't have a common clock. There is no common clock. So the data is our clock. So we have to use it to clock our data to keep in sync with all the other ECUs. The second portion is when we actually send out or propagate. So that's when we actually send the bit out. If I'm the one talking, I send the bit out. Okay. And what I'm aiming for is that then I'm listening to the bus and trying to aim so that I'm listening for the bus right in between the 3rd and 4th quantum. And then if I see things are shifted a little bit, then I'm going to increase or decrease my first quantum, the first quarter on the next bit. That's how it works. So it's all actually all happening within that one bit time. Okay. And when we start to talk about CANFD, then things get a little more complicated. Because now we're changing speeds inside the frame, which is awesome.
So,
But yes.
if I can extrapolate, does that just suggest we actually have to, or maybe the speed driving this as opposed to?
Oh, like yeah, in order to do this, obviously, I'm going to have something a bit faster so I can, look and react, of course, yes. That's true, that's true. I'm going to definitely have to have something that's a bit faster so I can capture all that, make that all happen.
At minimum, it's 8x.
Yeah,
At minimum, it's 8x faster clock, internal clock. But you can actually scale it higher.
And your bus likewise has to be able to sustain that higher level of speed.
Well, the bits don't actually change any faster than 1 megabit. So your bit times don't transition faster than that 1 megabit. But the clock internal to each controller samples at 8x or higher.
So when you go to 16x, do you do a double sample now?
You still only have a single sample point. It's just you have more control over where that sample point, more resolution over where that sample
Okay, I
point.
didn't know if you had the double sample.
and by the way, this also gets to CANFD. When we get to CANFD, now we have to really pump it up because of this very reason. Because of this very reason.
Let's
Yes.
see, one of the points though is that like node B never really got to send that one.
That's right.
The micro will be told the transceiver to send a 1, but the transceiver said, well, I can't send a 1 because the bus has already been pulled to 0.
Yes.
So that it never really got to send anything
Not really.
on the CAN bus.
You would never
Inside
know.
its brain it did, but then when it went and read back on the CAN bus, like what's actually out there,
Mhm.
it saw a 0, said, hey, I was trying to send a 1, but there's a 0 on the CAN bus. I lost.
Yes.
So that's kind of the big deal. Is the
Yes.
0 it's reset. The 0 is actually dominant
Yes.
because it's all,
Yes.
like you said, it's a drain.
Yeah, and so when you look at the bus, you never even knew that 5A0 and 2A0 were even they were trying. All they can do is they get better luck next time. Give me end of frame, give me what's 6 or 7 bits, and then give me another 3 bits of just a quiet bus, which is our airframe space, and then I get to try again. And there might be 1, there might be 8, there might be 2, don't know, and I'll never know. If I'm hooked up as a test tool, do I even know that happened? No. Okay. If I am sending out something at the same time with the same arbitration ID, will I really know? Well, you'll know because you'll have errors in your data bits. So, but anyways, but yeah, that's a very good question. So, all right. Any other questions before I go on? I'm guessing no. All right. Let's move on. Got to exercise my bit timing muscles today. Don't usually get that choice. So, error detection. So whenever an error occurs, then what happens is I will immediately send an error frame. An error frame is 6 zeros in a row, which technically is illegal in CAN. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I don't have like that chipmunk going crazy. But the thing is, one thing that people don't really think about, because you'll see I say 6 to 12 bits here for the error frame. Well, the reality is, one ECU will send 6 bits in a row as the error frame. And then it's going to just keep on sending 1s indefinitely until everybody else stops sending their error frames, because guess what? I just caused an error on the bus, and everybody else that didn't believe it, they're all going to jump in and say, hey, you sent 6 zeros in a row. I'm sending 6 zeros in a row because you made an error. Guess what? I get 12. And then everybody will then be sending 1s all the time. They're just all going to keep on sending 1s. And once all of them send 8 bits high in a row, then that will be considered the end of the error frame, and we finish up with the end of frame space, which is another 7 bits that are high. And another 3 bits that are inter-frame space to space the 2 space frames apart. So that's one little thing that a lot of people don't realize when it says 6 to 12 bits. Why is that 6 to 12 bits? Well, it's probably going to be 12, and that's why. Because your error frame is going to make everybody else set an error frame. So, now, and there's a lot of different types of things that would cause an error frame. Could be a form error. Could be a bit stuffing error, which I'm going to get to bit stuffing as we get into Canopy, because I'll kind of talk about CAN and Canopy at the same time as we get to the end. But why is CAN going away? Is CAN going away? Yeah. Well,
No, it's here to stay.
Well, okay, so I can tell you, I have been in meetings with the 2 top people that do the advanced networking, and one of them is like, CAN is going away, and the other one is, no, CAN is not going away at all.
It's here to stay.
It's here to stay. It's going away. It's here to stay. It's going away. It's here to stay. And so, so I'm just going to kind of give you both sides of the debate, because this is something that, well, one thing is, well, there's not really any cybersecurity I can really provide very easily with CAN, and there's not enough bandwidth, and if I'm going to have self-driving cars, then why do I even mess with CAN? Like, why even bother? I should just be using Ethernet, okay? So why don't we just make everything in the car Ethernet? Well, this is where the other side gets jumped in, which is, well, I'm not just going to make LIN stuff, if you guys know about LIN bus or like some UART bus. I'm not going to just make everything Ethernet because it's there to be made as Ethernet. Well, that doesn't make any sense because it's just adding more cost. And if it actually works, why change it? Okay? And I can tell you right now, if you look at, say, like what GM has been doing over, like, say, the last 20 years, and Ford, etc. They started way back. They had all had JG50, and then as they made the move to CAN, you saw a lot of people making the move. But in production, even when they got to the very end, they kept on pumping out those JG50 cars. Okay, it really wasn't that long ago that GM was still making cars with JG50. To this, basically the last, was it 2012? That was the last one. Was it the Express VM? Yeah. Yeah, it's those two together that basically expired. So yeah, so 2012, that's like the year of my car. It's not that long ago. It's only 6 years ago. Okay. In the meantime, the last time anybody ever asked me to deal with JT50 at GM was 2009. And honestly, that was the only time that anybody would ask me. You know, personally, I'm not going to talk about why, but the thing is, the bottom line is, usually what you really find is that cost is king. Okay, if it still works and it's cheap, you're going to keep doing it. And why stop? Why stop? So CAN's not going away. That's my opinion. CAN is not going away. Maybe in 20 years, maybe, I don't know, maybe. But the thing is, it's cheap. It's really cheap. Virtually every, virtually every micro that you can think of that has any significance is really going to tell, it's really going to have a CAN channel on it. You know, I mean, it's, so that's one of these things, it's kind of a debate though, you know. And I run into it over and over and over again right now, because right now everybody's thinking about that, but I guarantee you, and the bottom line is, when at sea level, those guys that sit, they have their shoes on, nice shoes, and they're sitting in the suits, and they're at the big table. I guarantee you, those guys are like, oh, it's still cheap, still works, keep making it. And that's exactly what all of us guys are going to do. We're going to keep making it in the way that they tell us to. And it's all going to be about money. So now, so that kind of gives us a quick idea of CAN in and of itself. Okay? And now we're kind of getting into like, let's talk about CAN FD. Okay? So now, let's talk about why CAN is just not going to cut it. It's just not going to cut it for some of our things. At this point, we've got to the point where we're doing, well, one thing, OTA. If I need to do over-the-air updates, and if I'm like flashing at 510, and I have just one ECU that has like a 40 megabyte payload, I got to flash 40 megabytes. It's going to take me a while. That is a problem. Now, if I did not have OTA, and I had to flash 40 megabytes, I would go to the dealer, and I'd say, hey, dealer, reflash it. And they'd say, okay, that's fine. And maybe they're going to write up 6/10 an hour to flash that ECU and hand it back to me. So for a guy to just plug in a tool, and then grab a donut and a coffee while my car's flashing, and sit there. And I know there's people that spend 20, 30 minutes flashing one ECU sometimes. And it's not because there's errors, it's because the payloads are that big. They're 20, 40, 60 plus megabytes. Okay? So you just got a lot of code and put it in a lot of these boxes. And if you're flashing over CAN, you got a problem. Okay? Because I'm doing this 8 bytes at a time. And then I'm burning some of those bytes because I'm using 15765-2. So I'm using the first byte of the counter. So it's like, this is going to take me a while. So that's a problem. Of course, the complexity, being able to deal with all the different components, the architectures we're seeing out there are just ridiculous. Some of the things people are dreaming up are just, they're just inhuman. I mean, decentralizing this, all the control systems of the vehicle, that just leading all these different subsystems, okay? As we go into autonomy, we're talking about our traditional electrical architecture where we've got just several buses that have lots and lots of stuff on it. And now we're starting to centralize more things into, like more and more functions into less and less functional units that have really high processing power, okay? We still are ending up though with still having multiple buses and they just might not have as many ECUs. They may only have one ECU on each of the buses. I might end up with a bunch of CAN networks and end up with just one ECU on each one, potentially, because of the amount of data I'm transferring for each of those ECUs. Kind of crazy. Cybersecurity, well, we weren't really thinking of that, were we? Okay, so I have an 8-byte payload, and I have to transfer meaningful data. So where am I going to put a Mac in this? Well, I'm not, because I have no room. Okay, so what's that now? Use a PC. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh. That's right. I forgot, Robert's here for the bad jokes. So yes, so now we got time, and time is one of our most expensive things, right? Most valuable thing in the universe, right? So if you're a control integration engineer, all your life is like every time you bring that car into the shop, you're reflashing at least one ECU. So these are the guys that will call me up and say like, this thing's flashing so slow. Okay, so it must be time to choose. Time to choose, Mr. Friedman. So you're going to have to go to Ethernet. Or if we could, if I told you that we could minimize the changes and improve CAN, and we can, CAN. So CAN stands for flexible data. It's flexible in two different ways. Okay, you can go faster, and you increase the payload size. You could say it's CAN 3.0, but in the spec 11898, it is called CAN FD. And they now call the old CAN classical CAN. So why not some other network? Well, the thing is, it's kind of tough getting off of the drug of CAN. And so if I can basically get many of the benefits that I get with CAN, but go faster, flash faster, be able to add cybersecurity, okay, suddenly it is actually potentially a viable thing to use for autonomy, certainly for ADAS, okay. So as you look at this, you find out, well, still pretty reliable, it really is. Getting that larger payload, definitely helpful, definitely helpful. Still just as flexible, being able to use that CAN ID to increase or decrease priorities, etc. It's kind of useful, okay? So the one biggest issue is bit timing. Because now, if I'm going to speed up and go 8x, and by the way, the 8 times speed that I'm talking about, it's not during half of that frame. It's only during the data frame. So that means I am changing speed mid-frame, mid-bit, in fact. And that means I got to sample a lot quicker. And now the quantas I was talking about, depending on the speed and what you're doing, you might have to have up to 96 divisions instead of the 8 that CAN has built in, well, not built in, but that's the design criterion, is 8. So then that means I got to be sampling out a lot faster. My clock speed's got to be a lot faster, which isn't necessarily a problem. Of course, faster usually means more money. So that's one of those things I have to worry about. That alone means Canopy means more money. And it certainly does cost more money. Okay. So CAN is very robust. I could get away with having no termination if I use CAN sometimes. If I don't quite wire it up right, believe it or not, it still will work. If the bit timing's not right, I can still get away with it. In CanFD, it's quite critical. So you have to make sure to have termination at both ends. You can't just throw one resistor on my network because I'm setting up just one ECU on my bench and hooking up a test tool. And I'm like, well, it's 220 ohm resistors. I'll just throw a 62 ohm resistor in there, and that should be okay. No, you have to put two 120s at each end because you really have the problem of reflection if you don't have that. If you don't have it there, okay. So there's a few goals and enhancements. Some of these have actually been had been cataloged. There's a paper that a guy from GM, now PSA, because he was an Opel guy, put together. I unfortunately can't give that paper out, but it was okay to give it out to people in the community if you asked him. Unfortunately, Harold Heisler, I don't have his new email at PSA, but I can guess it. So increase that bandwidth and keeping as much the same as possible. It turns out the wiring is still the same. Still the same wiring. Unshielded twisted pair, just like the old stuff. So as long as we keep those terminations in there, we're in good shape. Here are the changes. I quickly went through the Canopy format before, and that's what I'm showing at where it says CAN base format. This is actually from some snapshots out of a previous version of the spec, not the current version, but they might have like slight little changes in the names, but they really are the same as the current spec. So basically, you still have your ID, and then back in the day, we had this RTR bit, which we were never using. Nobody really used that. There's an ID bit for the extended ID, and then a reserve bit 0. We actually started making that RTR a reserve bit itself, because nobody used it anyway. Maybe we'll use it some other time. And then IDE, and now the R0 becomes EDL, which is extended data link. I'll talk about that in a second. We push that R0 down 1 bit, and we have 2 extra bits before our DLC. Bit rate switch and ESI, or error state indicator. Okay. So let me back up here because the name EDL, extended data link, is also called, it's actually called FDF in the latest version of the spec. They changed it midstream. So FDF or EDL, really the same bit. If we have a recessive, it's going to be Canopy format. If it's dominant, it's going to be Troubleshoot format. Okay. And then if you have bit rate switch on, if it's recessive, we're going to the faster rate. We're actually switching right on that boundary with that bit rate switch. Right after that, we go to faster data rate. Okay. And the ESI is something that's kind of unique. I didn't really talk about it, but CAN has its own built-in error handling, if you will. The error handling is basically, hey Arvin,
Yes.
how late are we supposed to go tonight? 7:30, right?
Yes, 10 more minutes.
Midnight. Yeah, don't worry. I'm
I
gonna
mean-
give Robert some time here in a second. Yeah.
Yeah, 7:35.
Don't worry, we'll be fine.
And
I'm
then
almost
discussion,
done.
so Q&A after that.
This part's the shortest part, believe it or
Yeah.
not.
I actually found out the reason why I couldn't make it.
Why?
He went to the other meetup in Detroit.
Yeah, that's what I was worried
Oh,
about. That's what I was
wow.
worried happened.
Yeah.
Because you
Wow.
got exactly the same name, and the people, that's what
Yeah.
I thought initially. I said, oh, it's down there.
So, yeah,
That's
it's
nice.
like, well, he'll be here next month, hopefully.
Yeah.
And
We'll have to,
we'll
yeah.
try to make sure we coordinate with the other
Well,
meetups.
I'm gonna try to coordinate with data speed because I think we might have may have one of the cars here for next time. So we'll see. We'll see about that. Well, we hope. So anyway, an error state indicator allows us to externally indicate what the error of the transmit error counter and receive error counters are inside of the ECU. We can actually say, is the ECU in error active, which is the normal state, or error passive mode, which is one step away from bus off where we just listen and don't do anything else. So, and we do the same thing, we do essentially the same kind of moving things around in an extended frame. For the CRC, we actually make some changes in stuff bits. I didn't talk about stuff bits, but we have stuff bits in CAN so that we guarantee there's transitions at least once every 5 bits, or every 6 bits. Basically, if we have 5 bits in a row that are the same, we automatically send a stuff bit after we get through the arbitration field to make a transition. So if we send a bunch of zeros in a row, we have to have some transitions so we can keep the clock going, that data as a clock going for all the ECUs. We changed that a little bit during the CRC field for the Canopy, okay? Because we have a little bit of extra stuff going on to make the speed things up and slow things down for the data frames, okay? So basically what we do is that when we get into the CRC, instead of using the old rule like we did, we still use that old rule up to, but not including the CRC, but as soon as you get to the CRC, they're fixed stuff bits. So the first bit is a stuff bit, and then after every fourth bit after that, we use a stuff bit. Okay. And we have some extra stuff inside the CRC as well. So now the CRC is longer, and we have extra stuff at the beginning as well. Okay. So the stuff count is a new piece that we add as part of our CRC field. We actually count the number of stuff bits before the CRC, divided by 8, and the remainder is what we put in for the stuff bits. And that remainder is gray coded. So I got a little gray coding here. So basically, gray coding is essentially it's still like binary, but we just change 1 bit at a time. Instead of like I'm going, if I'm going from 1 to 2 to 3, Okay, it's like, well, here, 1 to 2, I'm actually changing 2 bits, and 0, 1 goes to 1, 0, but here, 0, 1 goes to 1, 1, to make sure we only have 1 bit change at a time. We have a parity on top of that, so if we have an even number of stuff bits, oh, I'm sorry, it's a parity for the stuff count. So if we have an even number for the stuff count, then we're going to make it 0. If it's not, it's a 1. And then we change the length, because it turns out standard can was wrong all this time. There's actually, I don't think I have, well, I do have it in here for you, but an explanation of, a little explanation of the Hamming window, number of errors you could have before you end up having a mistakenly correct, if you will, CRC. It turns out our old can actually had a short, one that was actually too short. And when they made CanFD, the original spec used the wrong assumption again from 1985. And then, once that wrong assumption was made, somebody was like, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. And now it really matters because CanFD is a lot touchier. So they actually changed it. So now, if you have 16 bytes or below, it's a 17-bit. If it's above 16 bytes, it is 21-bit CRC. Okay. We also did a couple changes here. Believe it or not, I'm almost done. So if you want to talk about your things in a second. Hey, Arvin, can you give a microphone to Robert because he's going to be jumping up here because I'm almost done. So CAN 2.0, we know from 0 to 8, basically, or 0 to 7, whatever the DLC is, it's 7. It's 0 to 7. Just what it says. As soon as you get to 8, it's 8, sure. If it's 9, it's still 8 because it's CAN 2.0. So basically, as soon as the first bit is set to 1, then it's always 8. Now we took advantage of that for CanFD because we did not expand it because we're trying to keep everything the same. We think, oh, we should just throw a couple extra bits in there so we can go up to 64 and make it whatever we want. No, sorry. What we did is we used those remaining bits to encode. So now we basically are encoding. Lin actually, one of the versions of Lin actually had something like this where you do 1, 2, 4, 8. But anyway, basically 9 really means 12 bytes, 10 is 16, and so on. When you get to 15, you have 64 bytes. Okay, so can you do 62 bytes? No, you're doing 64 anyway, sorry. You do 62-bit, if you do 62 bytes, it's a form error. That would be an error frame. So making the transition, this is the interesting part. So it turns out there's several different ways you make the transition, but it turns out that really is only one way I see people do it almost all the time. So you would love to just have CAN 2.0 ECUs on the bus, and then I'll just throw one CanFD one on there. Unfortunately, it's not backward compatible, because as soon as I start to clock things at a higher rate, then all the CAN 2.0 ECUs are going to complain and send error frames. So once again, all the molecules of our body exploding at the speed of light, and it's bad. So basically, how do we deal with that problem? Okay, one way to deal with that is we just brute force redesign everything on that bus. We say everything's got to be CanFD. Replace the transceivers, micros if we need to, and move on. This is actually the way that you see virtually every manufacturer go, but not everybody does it this way. There's also actually some silicon out there where you can replace the transceiver alone, and the transceiver is a smart transceiver that will filter out all the CanFD data so that the ECU, everything else within, will actually only receive the CAN frames. So it only sends and receives CAN frames. Basically, it's going to be in the matrix, and it's going to do what we want it to do. We're just going to feed it what we want. Only CAN frames for you. Okay. I have run into that. It's uncommon, but it is happening out there right now. Okay. The third way is, well, we can just use this for flashing. Put all the other ECUs asleep, and then we'll flash in CanFD. But that's actually not a very good use. It's a very focused use. I would say a waste of CanFD's talent. Okay. And then I just have a little quick illustration here, and I'm going to turn it over to Robert here. So right up here is standard CAN, 1 megabit, and just 8 bytes. And that is taking 111 microseconds to do that entire frame. Now, right below it is 1 megabit a second, but the CAN frames are 8 megabits a second and 64 bytes. And it is 112.8 microseconds. So pretty much the same speed. It turns out when you do the calculation, you're getting roughly 10x efficiency because CAN has a lot of overhead. And so now we're kind of wasting time as we're doing the overhead. Now with 64 bytes clocking it faster, we're able to fit just more stuff in less time, and now the overhead is actually a lot more tolerable. So lots of use cases which I've already hit on. Of course, quick, shameless plug. But yeah, of course, Vehicle Spy, our software that Intrepid, we also make the Value CAN, and we have Value CAN 4 series that has CAN-FD. Basically, everything we make nowadays has CAN-FD available. All the Ethernet tools actually have CAN in them, because guess what? We never talked about sleep. And it turns out, guess what? For automotive Ethernet, none of them have sleep. So therefore, guess what we use to implement sleep and wake up? CAN. So it's not going away. I'm sorry, go ahead. The new My Fighter 2. So that's really like the most popular product we make. 8 channels, CAN-FD. Yeah. It's got 4 channels of WIN on it as well. These are heavy duty. They're cool. Robert, did you want to talk?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to one of your slides.
Yeah, sure.
All right, everybody look at that. And remember that slide.
If only I
It
could
really
just like,
segues really from there. I'll be real fast.
yeah. Introduce yourself too.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Robert Leale. I work with Intrepid as well. Don is also my superior, the superior Don, I call him. Thanks, Don. And I work primarily as a sales support engineer for our West Coast office, but I also dabble a bit in cybersecurity. I just want to talk real quickly, you can see it, about one approach that Don mentioned is, you could have all of your CAN nodes switch to CAN-FD, but of course there's cost associated with switching every node over and updating and refreshing every node. So a lot of the OEMs are choosing not to do that and rather rolling it out slowly. In some cases, some controllers continue to have just standard CAN bus, classic CAN, some do not. So you got a quick intro to CAN bus. What I'm sort of presenting is just essentially this information right here is something we discovered a couple months ago. It's really not discovered, sort of rediscovered this, and I'll show you why. It's possible that a classic CAN node could be misconfigured. In fact, this was a problem that we had a long time ago when we first initially released one of our products. We had misconfigured one of the bits in CAN bus. And that bit is called the R0 bit. In classic CAN bus, it's the reserve bit 0. And typically this would be set to 0 or dominant bit. But if it's set to a recessive or a 1, that's what's indicated here. If it's set to a 1, it's actually misconfigured. You should always set R0 to 0. And so if it's set accidentally to a 1 or a recessive bit, that indicates to nodes in the future that this is actually a future revision of the CAN spec. Well, at the time, 10 years ago, there wasn't a future revision of the CAN spec, but today there is CAN-FD. So now this R0 bit turned into the FDF bit, that bit that indicated that this is in fact a CAN-FD frame. And so if a tool has misconfigured, most of the time in a normal CAN situation, that would be it. It just is misconfigured. The other nodes would just accept that and move on. They just kind of ignore the fact that it was misconfigured. But now with CAN-FD, this is a problem because we're indicating that this classic CAN frame is indicating that in fact it is a CAN-FD frame. No big deal. There's another bit after that. That is typically would have to be also a 1 or a recessive bit to really cause any problems. But that is actually the first bit of what's called the data length code. I have an error here. I already noticed this is the third bit. I'll fix this later. But this is the third bit of the data length, and that indicates that the data length is 8 or greater. And so when these two combine, when a misconfigured CAN frame combines with having a data length greater than 8, it actually indicates exactly what a CAN-FD frame would do today. And so this is a challenge because this malformatted CAN 2.0B frame is masquerading as a CAN-FD frame, but not actually a CAN-FD frame, as a CAN-FD 2.0 frame, which doesn't actually exist yet. And so what CAN-FD specifies is if you can do one of two things when this event occurs. You can do nothing and ignore the frame, which is typically how a lot of OEMs are configuring their system, or you can configure it as an error state, a form error. So if an OEM, again, I do cybersecurity, so from a cybersecurity perspective, if this is misconfigured and you have a rogue or a threat controller sending a message in this format, the CAN-FD controller will simply ignore this message as if it had never happened. And if this controller is an engine controller or a intrusion detection controller or some sort of security controller, that can represent a problem for automotive systems. And so this is actually called out in the specification itself. The CAN-FD spec, says, hey, this could be potentially a problem, so make sure you configure it correctly to be an error. But in that situation, then we have a problem if the next specification of CAN-FD comes out, or CAN-FD 2.0 comes out, then it will break forward compatibility of CAN-FD. So it's sort of a catch-22 where if you can ignore it and be compliant with future revisions of CAN bus, or you can call it an error, in which case you are not future compatible. And so that's the challenge that the OEMs have to face. And it's just important to know, again, if you are doing a mixed network, that could be a problem for the applications that are using this. And also, another application where this could be a problem is if the attacker spoofed a frame to multiple CAN nodes, and one was a CAN-FD node, and the other one was a CAN 2.0 node. The CAN 2.0 node, or classic CAN node, would succeed in receiving this message, whereas the 2.0, the CAN-FD frame or node would actually fail to receive it, causing a problem where they are out of synchronization. And so that could potentially be a problem, especially if it's like an ECM, TCM kind of command that was both of them were supposed to interpret simultaneously. Only one would interpret it, and of course, intrusion detection systems could also have a problem as well. So I guess that's kind of the crux of what I'm saying is that there's a known issue in CAN-FD where if you have mixed networks, there could be a problem, and we're doing a lot of research here. This is a paper I'm working on to publish on our website and a blog to try to just sort of notify engineers before it becomes a big problem. So if you are using CAN and CAN-FD, this could be an issue. And the truth is they are doing a slow rollout. So this is actually in the very beginning of CAN-FD. This will be a very likely scenario where CAN-FD is put into a module and maybe not activated yet. And when that happens, you could potentially have this issue. So, any questions? I know I just sort of threw a lot. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned this CAN-FD having 8 megabits per second.
Yep, update. Thanks.
I thought, we're dealing with autonomous vehicles and things. You've got things like LiDAR, you've got cameras and stuff. It does look like you have bandwidth. So what?
Yeah, so actually I did kind of prepare for that question. So where did it go? Here it is. So a good way to look at this is, so you'll have CAN bus here maybe activating direct controls of systems, whereas the LiDAR will go back through like an Ethernet, probably an Ethernet backbone, going back to an RTOS or a real-time operating system computer that might then also connect to a CAN bus gateway for actuation. So your controls, your direct control systems will connect to a node that not only connects to the CAN bus, but actual Ethernet backbone. And so you're going to have this hybrid system between CAN activated nodes and CAN connected nodes that are doing like kind of real-time-ish, pseudo real-time controls. And Ethernet-based systems would be your LiDAR, your cameras, things that need bigger pipes, right? They need more data throughput than CAN can ever provide. And this is actually from Voyage's website. So this is actually an autonomous vehicle that is driving around now in the streets of San Francisco. They have an amazing amount of cameras and LiDAR on their system that all go back to a single computer that processes that information, and then that computer sends its commands, steering commands and everything else, braking over CAN bus. And initially, CanFD is so new that the applications really are in question. I mean, people are actively developing them today. So we'll see what they ultimately do. But a lot of them, even regular CAN controllers, if you just need to emphasize, hey, what's the position or what do we want the requested torque of the engine controller? You really only need 2 bytes of data at about 10 millisecond update rate to successfully do torque on a vehicle. CAN bus right now can do that without a problem. The challenges are cybersecurity, right? If I wanted to spoof that message, I could easily do that. Whereas if you added into CanFD, you can add information to the end of the frame to sort of give it a level of security where spoofing would be challenging, very, very challenging, costly, is the best way to describe it. So it makes it, and even if you did it on one vehicle, to be able to do it to the next vehicle would be even more challenging, just as challenging as the first. So it becomes a bigger challenge for cybersecurity with regular CAN bus. So that's the reason why a lot of people are moving to CanFD. Not necessarily the speed, but 64 bytes of data is better than 64 bits of data. And I think that's really one of the big solutions that CanFD has solved, not necessarily the speed increase. That's a nice advantage as well. But you do not have to enable the speed increase at all. You can turn the speed increase off and just keep regular CAN packets and just don't change the speed as well. And that is actually really important for the EMI related issues. A lot of these OEMs are dealing with not just standard CAN and how fast the bit rates are, but as soon as you make that data go faster, you have to shape the edges a little bit better. You have to be cleaner in your data. You have to have fewer corners for radiating emissions, and so it becomes a bigger challenge for them. So even without the speed increase, they get that packet frame size increase, which helps them with their cybersecurity posturing, especially for autonomous vehicles, where you're allowing, especially if it's a self-driving, fully autonomous vehicle that you allow somebody to get into, like a taxi style, like this one right here, this taxi. There's no driver, right? That's the idea. So you just put this on the road and there's no driver. So you're really giving access to, anybody who wants to walk into that vehicle, plug something into a connector that might be sitting around, has really unfettered access. There's no driver there. So cybersecurity is something these companies are actively thinking about, and with CanFD, it does give them a little bit more flexibility because they need CAN bus. They just have to have Ethernet. It's too costly. There's a lot of controllers that just don't support it yet. Maybe they never will. And it's pseudo real time. I mean, it's not real time. If you need real time, then you go to like FlexRay or something. But CAN bus has that ability. Still has a lot of ability to do these applications. Any other questions? So yeah, I kind of anticipated that question. It's something I was worried about. All right, thank you. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Arvin?
Any other questions or? Okay.
Anyways, we're working on this. Paper should be out soon, and then if there's anything else that anybody has any questions, just feel free to contact Arvin through the meetup. Thanks.
Let's give a round of applause for Don and his